gentlemen, will you please welcome to the stage the founder and principal of Von Johnson and Associates, Mr. Von Johnson.
You asked me to do something on safeguarding assets. What about the vault? Which could also be titled, you got a lot of old stuff in big buildings. You've got negative, internegative, interpositive, magnetic film, videotapes of all different sizes and gauges and audio formats. And now you have assets that are born digital, and you have assets that are digitally derived. And all day long we talked about content as though that content exists, forever. And the only way that it does exist forever is to take care of it. You have to be mindful that all this old stuff that's sitting in buildings all over the world represents the stuff that we're going to make money with for a very long time if we take care of it. Okay, so what's the purpose of this presentation? And that's to underscore the importance of building commercial readiness into your company's disaster preparedness strategies and tactics, and to implement ways to measure the effectiveness of those strategies and tactics. The context of this presentation is because my company provided strategic and technical consultation services to a consortium of very large insurance companies associated with the fire that occurred down the hill here just 2 years ago. Now, the problem and our task associated with that problem was to figure out a way to analyze the media asset loss on a title-by-title basis. We developed tools that consider up to 4,000 different variables, and we ultimately created a method of looking at titles that incorporates their commercial activity. And we came up with a fairly sophisticated decision matrix. NBC Universal asked us to do a survey of current best practices around media asset management, including storage practices, restoration, preservation, and disaster preparedness. And you're welcome to download a copy of this at that URL. Our approach was questionnaires and personal interviews. And the characteristics of those interviews and questionnaires was that we wanted to talk to companies that had very large media collections. We had those conversations under the cloak of anonymity. We wanted to talk about their archiving practices as well as their active library. So the good news, key findings. Everybody's doing a really good job of separating their materials from, each other, so that if you have something like a fire, you'll be able to rebuild that library over time. Everybody's doing a good job with, maintaining humidity and temperature control. Restoration is driven by commercial needs, and preservation is driven by age and gauge. Everybody's struggling with born digital and digitally derived assets. Some of the areas for improvement. Question number one, does your asset management application or any application at your company calculate the level of risk on a title-by-title basis? The answer was no. Question number two, does your disaster recovery plan include the means and method to prioritize recovery efforts based on commercial activities and contractual obligations? The answer was, one said yes. Everybody else said no. And the third question, briefly describe at the 10,000-foot level your business recovery plan in the event of a disaster. And the answer was, we're working on one. It's interesting. This isn't a problem that you can give to one department and say this is your problem. It's a problem that's spread across the whole enterprise. That enterprise, has a corporate risk management group. They have a local risk management group. They got technical operations. and they've got the commercial guys. And these folks typically do not talk to one another. So they've never had a reason to. One of the, if anything good came out of the disaster that occurred 2 years ago, it's that these folks are talking to one another about this problem. What are the strategies and tactics of the entertainment industry historically and traditionally? Strategy is maintain the media assets in a manner to ensure distribution well into the future, 100 years. The tactical response is geo-separate the master media elements in climate-controlled and secure locations. And do that, put the master stuff in a place different from the working library. I would add this: ensure your immediate commercial interests are considered in the plan. And the tactical response to that would be determine the valuation method in advance of the disaster. How are you going to value your stuff? And if you can come up with a way of valuing the stuff in advance and working with your broker or with the insurers, you might be able to come up with some very clever and clear ways of expressing that in your insurance agreements. And then another is to test the effectiveness of that strategy and do that on a regular basis. And then the last is to solidify what I call an emergency SWOT response plan. If you have a disaster, what happens first? What happens next? Who's in charge? What do they do? Who is assembled? Where do they go? What happens next? Names are going to change in boxes, but if you can at least put together a plan that says, here's what happens next, it will save a lot of time and will save a lot of money.